Hello, my name is Grace Halberg, and for much of my life, I was the name that went unspoken at my brother's grand military ceremony, the one my family extended invitations to everyone for. I found myself excluded from the guest list, not due to chance, but rather by intention. They removed my presence from the narrative. Despite the fact that I was the one who crafted the majority of it, my name was absent from the program, not even in the smallest detail. I lingered at the threshold of the family room, the glossy trifold pamphlet quivering ever so slightly in my grasp. The title gleamed in gold, paying tribute to Lieutenant Lucas Halberg, a proud son of Annapolis. A line beneath proclaimed, Operation Resolute Spear, Heroes Among Us. Within the pages, the name Lucas echoed 7 times. Mine never appeared at all. I couldn't quite understand the reason behind my surprise. This wasn't the first instance of my existence being wiped away. Years ago, when I graduated from West Point with distinction, my father was preoccupied with court and unable to attend. Deborah thoughtfully sent flowers, along with a heartfelt voicemail. Lucas sent a brief message of congratulations. This time, however, I had received an invitation. In a technical sense, the heavy envelope had shown up just 3 days prior, lacking a return address, with only the Halberg family crest embossed on the back. Within, a beautifully crafted invitation on luxurious linen paper, accompanied by a brief, heartfelt note from Deborah. We sincerely hope you'll be with us. Grace, this marks a significant moment for the family. There was no acknowledgement of my actions. There's no need for an apology regarding the quietness. I made the journey from Nevada to Maryland in just 2 days, hardly taking a moment to pause. The journey felt frigid and unending, yet with every mile, another layer of uncertainty melted away. I kept my arrival a secret from everyone. Not Margaret, not Hargrave, not even my team. I sought neither solace nor forewarning. I felt the need to experience it firsthand. Here I was, back in the house where I grew up, clad in my complete dress uniform. The medals pinned to my chest seemed to carry an unusual weight, not from their physical mass, but from the profound silence they evoked. Deborah moved gracefully through the room, embodying the essence of a polished hostess, adorned in pearls and radiating practiced warmth. Donald lingered near the flickering flames, a whiskey glass in hand, as he regaled 2 of Lucas's former ROTC companions with stories that danced between laughter and nostalgia. Lucas stood at the center of attention, his sun-kissed skin in tall, polished frame drawing everyone in as he shared a carefully crafted story about traversing challenging landscapes, armed only with determination and a compass. He pointed to a framed photo on the mantel, capturing the 2 of us side by side in our desert attire. It was trimmed, just his name appeared in the caption. I lingered near the bookshelf, partially concealed, partially observing. Occasionally, a passerby would steal a glance my way, only to avert their eyes swiftly, as if caught between the realms of reality in the ethereal presence of someone draped in tailored blues. You didn't RSVP, Deborah said behind me, her voice a blend of sweetness and authority. I had no idea I was on the guest list. I responded without looking back. Her laughter was restrained. Naturally, that makes perfect sense. Lucas was adamant that it was a family affair. I pivoted to meet her gaze. Her gaze flicked to my ribbons before meeting my eyes. Cautious not to dwell too long, you appear quite polished, she remarked. It's a solemn and significant occasion, steeped in tradition and honor. Her smile remained steadfast. Indeed, however, the majority of the guests were Sue. Before I had a chance to respond, she snatched the program from my grasp. Isn't it just beautiful? A local designer was brought on board. It's quite elegant, I observed. It seems my name is absent from it. A moment of stillness, brief, yet sufficient. She pursed her lips in a feigned display of worry. I believe it was merely a small error in formatting. Clearly, the spotlight is on Lucas. He's the one on duty. I remained completely still. We found ourselves in the same campaign. Indeed, she replied with a measured tone, yet he remains in the service. It seems you've taken on a more administrative role. Haven't you? I remained silent. She lifted her hand, delicately rearranging the gold chain that rested against her skin. Honestly, Grace, I wouldn't cause a fuss. This evening is all about joy and celebration. Let's not drag old wounds back into the spotlight. Funny thing, she always framed my silence as drama, my restraint as threat. The room broke into applause as Lucas finished another story. I glanced toward the hallway mirror. A dozen people clapped and laughed as if nothing were missing, as if my name had never been printed, never said, never needed. I was in uniform. I just never stopped serving. I led missions across continents. But in my own home, I was just a ghost. The silence in my Nevada apartment was different from the one in Annapolis. Out here, it was chosen thick with dust and distance, not dismissal. The desert light poured through the blinds, sharp and indifferent. I'd barely unpacked after the trip, and my uniform jacket still hung over a chair, creased from the drive. The pamphlet from Lucas's ceremony lay untouched on the table next to the envelope Deborah had sent. I hadn't decided whether to throw it out or frame it as evidence. I opened my laptop and signed into the secure archive. The declassification notice had come in that morning. Operation Hawthorne officially unsealed after 4 years of strategic silence. The mission that had cost us weeks of planning 3 lost drones and a dozen lives. The mission I had led. I scanned the report summary, my fingers tightening over the trackpad. Under commanding officer, one name stared back at me. Captain Lucas Hallberg, not Lehan. Call Grace Hallberg. Not even a footnote. My breath caught in my throat, a familiar sting rising like acid. I clicked deeper into Comlog's GPS Trail's internal assessments. I recognized my phrasing in the daily sit-reps, the threat escalation protocols I had written from scratch. The signature on the after-action report was mine, or at least it had been. Now the metadata listed someone else. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. They hadn't just omitted me, they'd rewritten history. The phone rang, a soft, steady tone from the corner of the room. I didn't need to check the screen. Only one person called me from a landline anymore. I picked up. Hi, Grandma. Margaret Hallberg didn't bother with pleasantries. They think they can erase you with paper and speeches, she said. Her voice was dry as the Nevada air. They're doing a decent job, I muttered. You don't need their invitation to exist. Grace, you never did. A pause. You showed up anyway. I wanted to see it for myself. Good. Now make sure they see you. After we hung up, I returned to the laptop. A new email had landed in my inbox marked Priority from Lieutenant. Call. Row. Grace just saw Hawthorne got unsealed. I tried to flag the report. What they posted is incomplete. No mention of the southern flank maneuver. I remember you coordinating that from the drone blind. You kept us from losing the whole battalion. I'd swear under oath you were in command. Row. I stared at his message pulse quickening. I pulled up the archived version of the full report. The version only a handful of us had access to back then. It had my operational maps, the coded call signs I'd assigned, the full chain of command diagrams. Everything matched, except for the signature block. There, in an unmistakably neat cursive, was the name Lucas Hallberg. The font looked too clean, too recent. I checked the metadata. Edited 5 months after final submission. 5 months after I'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel and had quietly asked the department not to publicize it. I hadn't wanted Lucas to feel overshadowed. He was still junior, still clawing for relevance. I thought I was being kind. I opened the scan of the updated final report. A small note was embedded in the admin logs, amended for internal consistency. Per D. Hallberg's ears, U3 14 to 21. D. Hallberg. My father. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. Not the department, not a red tape error. Him, the legal training. He'd always touted the favors he'd accumulated in military policy circles, the reputation as a defender of protocol. He'd them to erase his own daughter from military record and replace her with his son. It wasn't just favoritism. It was calculated. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then moved fast. I downloaded the unaltered original and backed it up to a secure drive. Then I saved every log file, every edit note. I wanted timestamps, IP addresses, revision histories. They had rewritten the report once. They wouldn't get the chance again. Time to show them who really commanded that battlefield. Even with my ID, they asked me to wait outside. The sun over Arlington was unseasonably sharp, bouncing off the academy's pale marble and ceremonial brass. Flags lined the walkway like teeth. Tight, silent, unyielding. I adjusted the hem of my charcoal suit and stepped toward the entrance gate. Ignoring the tension already rising in my chest, This wasn't my first time being held at the door. A few years ago, I'd been denied access to the Defense Policy Summit in D.C. Even though I was on the operations panel, I'd made the mistake of walking in without my rank badge. They thought I was someone's aide, maybe an intern, after an hour of arguing and a phone call to Lieutenant Jen Hardwick. I got in, barely, no apology. But this wasn't Washington. This was family. Or so I told myself like a fool. The guard at the gate was young mid-20s, buzz cut, clean lines. He looked at my military ID, then down at the guest list on his tablet, his brow furrowed. Grace Halberg, he asked, tilting the screen toward me. Yes, I said. He tapped a few times. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name's not listed. I didn't flinch. I received a formal invitation. This event is for Operation Resolute Sphere, correct? Yes, ma'am. Active and honorary mentions. He hesitated. Do you have a printed copy of the invite? No, I said flatly. It was hand-delivered. From Deborah Halberg. That made him straighten. Wait here, please. He walked off, leaving me in the shadow of the gate's arch. Cars pulled in behind me. Guests in tailored suits and flowing dresses stepping out. I watched a woman adjust her son's tie while the father shook hands with another officer. Music drifted faintly from inside brass, tuning up soft chatter beneath it. Then I saw her. Deborah walked past the gate in a midnight blue gown, her heels clicking softly against the stone. She glanced toward me and didn't break stride. No smile, no acknowledgement, just a flicker of her eyes, like brushing dust from a sleeve. I could have called out. I didn't. Instead, I adjusted my cuffs and waited. The guard returned. I'm sorry. Ma'am, he said again, your name isn't authorized. I can't let you through without clearance. You've seen my ID. Yes, ma'am. But a voice rang from behind the gate. She's with me. Margaret Halberg stood just inside the inner courtyard, a cane in one hand, her spine straight, despite age and bone. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her presence carried through the space like a drumbeat. She's a Halberg. She belongs here. The guard turned to me, caught between protocol and instinct. I held his gaze. Well, he stepped aside. I walked in. People turned as I passed. Conversations paused, then resumed in forced tones. My name moved in whispers, like smoke across the hedges in white chairs. I recognized a few faces from Lucas's ROTC group, others from Annapolis circles. None approached. One woman frowned at my plain suit. Another leaned toward her husband and murmured something with a glance in my direction. My heels tapped on the flagstone path, measured, deliberate, every step echoing louder than any shout I could offer. I crossed into the courtyard proper. 2 columns of ceremonial cadets flanked the aisle sabers, lifted in silent salute for the honorees due to walk through, and I walked straight through it. I wasn't in uniform. I wasn't in the program, but I walked through that line of honor as if I'd been summoned. Because I had led soldiers through worse, as I neared the main reception area, I saw Deborah by the host podium speaking to a coordinator. Her expression shifted when she saw me. Lips pressed, eyes thin with disbelief. She stepped toward me quickly, her voice low. You shouldn't be here, my mother whispered. I smiled. And yet, there it was, Lucas Halberg, commander. No mention of the actual strategist. The screen flickered as the projector warmed up, washing the polished oak stage in a pale blue glow. The seal of the United States Army gave way to bold white text on black Operation Resolute Spear Command narrative. I sat near the back of the auditorium next to Margaret in the row reserved for family. Only half the seats were filled. Most of the guests were down front. Senators, generals, Gold Star families. The atmosphere buzzed with rehearsed reverence. We were only an hour from the real thing, the televised ceremony where my brother would be exalted in front of the nation. But first came the run-through. Lucas stood center stage in his tailored dress uniform, flanked by 2 aides and a communications tech. He cleared his throat, then began, Good afternoon. 4 years ago, in the heat of Northern Hawthorne's escalation, I stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. Enemy drones circled above. Friendly comms were down, and every path forward led through chaos. His voice carried clearly measured and just the right amount of humble. I'd heard him practice this cadence before, back when we were teens, and he recited model UN speeches in front of the bathroom mirror. Back when he still called me sis. instead of that colonel who never smiles. I opened my notebook. With limited personnel and no drone support, I coordinated our units into a pincer maneuver. Lucas continued gesturing to a map appearing on the screen behind him. This strategy, though risky, allowed us to reclaim Sector 3 and stabilize the corridor for evac. My hand clenched around the pen, but I didn't stop writing. I traced his phrases, each one carefully lifted from my own debriefings. I had said those exact words to Rowe, to Hargrave, to the War College panel. When they interviewed me post-deployment, I remembered sweating through that testimony, hands trembling knowing I wouldn't be quoted, just recorded. Beside me, Margaret leaned in and gently touched my wrist. Her hand was cool but steady, her thumb brushing against my pulse. She didn't speak, but I heard her loud and clear. It's time. Lucas continued narrating my work like he'd invented it. He wasn't improvising. He had rehearsed this over and over until it sounded lived, real, his own. The screen shifted again. Now came the tactical overlays, the visual spine of the operation, color-coded paths, terrain shifts, infrared patterns. I knew them by heart. I had spent nights curled over these same graphics coordinating unit locations with air support, triangulating blind spots no algorithm could solve. Except now in bold, at the top of the slide, mission design capped. Lucas Hallberg. My lips parted involuntarily. I barely registered the rest. The audience murmured in admiration, a few officers nodding at the brilliance of the commander's flanking sequences. I sat motionless, the lies blooming like rot across every surface. He wasn't just stealing credit, he was revising memory. When the rehearsal concluded, the lights came back up and the aides began collecting notes. Lucas descended the stage with ease, shaking hands, accepting praise. He hadn't seen me in the back, or maybe he had, and chose to ignore it. Margaret remained still, her hands folded over her cane. This is how dynasties work, she murmured softly. One child becomes a monument, the other a shadow. I exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to stand and confront him now. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. I felt my phone vibrate in my lap. I glanced down. Text from Rowe declassified. Commander wants to speak to you. Privately, he didn't ask why I waited this long. He just said, I'm glad you didn't wait longer. The air in the commandant's office was quiet but dense, like the moments before a storm finally cracks. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, striping the mahogany table in front of me. I hadn't sat across from a superior officer like this in over a year, not without knowing exactly what the agenda was. But this time, the room felt different, personal. General Hargrave leaned back in his chair, his weathered face unreadable. Behind him, a framed photo of the 203rd Tactical Regiment hung alongside his own medal citations. The man had led 3 major operations across 2 decades, and yet now it was my name that brought a crease to his brow. He pushed a folder across the table, thick stamped, declassified. In crisp red ink, I read the original Hawthorne records this morning, he said. The real ones, not the edited set they submitted to the Central Archive. I said nothing. I saw the coordination maps, the tactical overlays, the comms traffic. He opened the folder to a particular page, my signature. Beneath the after-action report, time-stamped, weeks before any alleged revision. Then, a second page, a metadata extract showing access from an IP associated with Donald Hallberg's private law office. I know who commanded that mission, Hargrave said simply. And it wasn't your brother. I met his gaze. Then why am I still not on the program? That's what I wanted to ask you. He paused. Do you want to be? For a moment, the room felt impossibly still. I thought about every time I'd chosen silence. When the promotion came and I turned down the photo op, when they offered to publish my case study in the War College Journal and I deferred, when Rowe asked me a year ago why I always stayed 2 steps back, because I didn't want the price, the questions, the spotlight, because I didn't want to hurt Lucas, because I thought somehow that survival was enough. Not anymore. I don't want a speech, I said. I don't want applause. I want the truth to be said clearly. Formally, on record. I don't want to look like a victim who just showed up late to claim credit. Hargrave nodded slowly. Good, because I just added a line to my speech. He slid another sheet across the table. It was brief, just an addendum, acknowledgement of the commanding officer of Operation Hawthorne. No drama, no flourish, just one correction. One name? You don't have to walk on stage, he added, but you'll be recognized. Publicly. On the record, you'll be unerased. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, the tension in my shoulders lifted just slightly. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't triumph, but it was something. My phone buzzed again. A text from Ro. Stage setup complete. Cameras are live. See you in 30. I stood smoothing my suit jacket. Thank you. General, he gave me a wry smile, then extended his hand. Let's give them a name. They tried to erase General Grace Halberg. Lucas stood at the podium, decorated with my blood and sweat. The cameras panned slowly across the rows of polished metals and crisp uniforms. Under the soft lights of the Arlington Hall, the ceremony unfolded like a pageant rehearsed, reverent, televised live for military networks nationwide. The flags hung heavy behind the stage, each representing the commands involved in Operation Resolute Spear, each one bearing witness. I sat midway down the center aisle, invisible in a sea of gleaming brass and white gloves. Margaret sat beside me, spine-straight cane tucked to her side. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Lucas adjusted the microphone. Distinguished guests, officers, veterans, family. His voice rang clear, confident. I knew that tone. He had coached him through it once when he failed a tactical simulation in officer school and called me in a panic. I spent 3 weeks tutoring him in strategic analysis over midnight video calls while I was stationed in Kandahar. He never once said thank you. Now he stood bathed in the glow of admiration, telling my story. Operation Hawthorne tested every principle of modern warfare, he said. With limited comms and terrain compromise, I had to make decisions that would affect the survival of over 200 soldiers. The audience murmured approval. I watched his hands gesture to the screen behind him, where the now familiar tactical map emerged. I recognized it instantly. My contours, my annotations, the same field designations I'd burned into muscle memory. Except this time, something was different. In the corner of the slide, usually reserved for title and reference metadata, a name had appeared. Command Strategy. Architect, Lieutenant Cole G. Halberg. The font was small, but unmistakable. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I heard the shift. The first murmurs from the front rows, a general leaning toward his aide, a pair of journalists tapping frantically on their tablets, a Navy Rear Admiral squinting at the screen, then back at her briefing folder. Lucas faltered just for a second. He glanced back at the screen, eyes narrowing, a tiny crack in his mask. But he kept going. Through careful coordination and adaptive maneuvering, the second slide appeared, another strategic overlay, another signature. Final field authorization, G. Halberg. The audience noise swelled, polite confusion, curdling into curiosity. Someone behind me whispered, "Wasn't she intel?" Then came the voice that silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hargrave said, rising from his seat and approaching the microphone. "Allow me to correct the record." He paused, letting the sentence land like a hammer on marble. Lucas froze mid-sentence. Hargrave nodded toward the screen, calm and composed. The tactical brilliance of Operation Hawthorne has long been credited to the officers in the field. But the true architect of that mission is sitting among us today. I didn't have to say a word. The document spoke louder than Lucas ever had. The room behind the stage was no longer just a green room. It was a battlefield. Officers in dress uniform huddled in knots, murmuring over tablets and briefing folders. Screens replayed the last slides of the ceremony on loop. Hargrave's voice echoed faintly from a recording, the true architect, sitting among us today. I stood against the far wall near the window, silent, observing, letting gravity do its work. Lucas sat slumped in a leather-backed chair, jaw-clenched eyes flicking between the display and the polished floor. Deborah hovered nearby, fuming in controlled outrage. She'd been whispering furiously to him for the last 10 minutes, but he hadn't responded. Rose stepped beside me, handing me a copy of the official operation dossier, declassified 5 hours ago, posted to internal command archives. Full attribution restored, metadata included. I took it without a word. He hesitated, then added, "They're already quoting it in the briefing room. Joint Command is convening a panel Monday." The room's shifting fast. From the opposite side, Hargrave approached, calm, measured, a clipboard in one hand, a sealed envelope in the other. "You've got admirers," he said with a faint smile, "and some very nervous old brass in D.C. Then, as if on cue, a massive screen behind the stage flickered to life again, this time broadcasting directly to the media chamber just off the hall. A scanned copy of the original Hawthorne battle strategy glowed blue against white, complete with timestamp and signature. At the bottom, in clean typed clarity, Lead Command Brigadier General Grace Hallberg, approved by Joint Operational Command Pacific Theater. A hush fell over the room. Even the murmurs died. Deborah hissed through her teeth. That file was never meant to be public. Lucas looked like he might say something, but his throat visibly tightened. For a man so comfortable at the podium, he suddenly seemed allergic to air. Then Hargrave stepped forward again, his voice calm, deliberate. To those wondering about accuracy, let me be very clear. This document was reviewed by the Office of Inspector General in the Department of Strategic Ethics. It is authentic. It reflects not only battlefield decisions, but the chain of command as it truly existed. He turned toward the room's press officers. Effective immediately, the record will reflect Brigadier General Grace Hallberg as commanding strategist of Operation Hawthorne. No clapping, no gasps, just stillness. The kind that breaks people. Lucas finally stood. Sir, I wasn't aware there was a mix-up. I thought he gestured vaguely that it was a clerical oversight. I never asked for my name on the command file. Someone else must have. Stop, Hargrave said quietly. Your name didn't appear accidentally. And the record of edits, some of which were routed through your father's private server, suggests otherwise. Lucas opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. From the rear of the room, I felt Margaret's gaze settle on me, steady as ever. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I looked into the cameras pointed at me now. Full cruise, silent lenses trained for a soundbite that would never come. I held the gaze. Let them wonder what it felt like. Let the silence settle like judgment. A Hargrave unrolled a final sheet of paper. Additionally, he said, the following is now entered into the Public Record Service citations for Unit Kilo 17 under General Hallberg's direction. Each of these soldiers filed direct testimony attributing their survival to decisions made on the ground by her command. He read 10 names, 11, 12, each one another nail in the myth of Lucas Hallberg, commander. Lucas stood frozen, shoulders tightening. His fingers fidgeted at the lapel of his jacket, where 2 rows of pins shone, like hollow promises. Then came the hand on his shoulder. A tall, clean-shaven officer in dark navy leaned in and said low but audible, "Your promotion's under review. They erased me from the guest list, so I let them announce me on national television." The stage lights washed the room in a gold so brilliant it felt unreal, like something from a stage drama, not a military recognition ceremony. Cameras were locked onto the podium. Microphones gleamed. Across the rows of polished seats, hundreds of officers, veterans, and family members turned towards the man standing confidently at center stage. General Hargrave cleared his throat. The audience, still humming with whispers from the earlier revelations, fell completely silent. He adjusted his glasses, then looked straight into the front row. Before we close tonight's ceremony, he began, there is one more name we must recognize. I exhaled once deep. Margaret gently placed her gloved hand over mine for just a second, then released. Hargrave's voice rang out crisp and unwavering. For too long, credit was misplaced. Honor was misdirected, and a soldier who exemplified intelligence, courage, and command was deliberately left out of her own legacy. Today we correct that. He turned facing the cameras directly. Please stand with me, he said, as we officially welcome back to our roles. General Grace Hallberg. The sound that followed wasn't applause at first. It was chairs scraping back, dozens of them, then hundreds. The entire room stood, except 2. Lucas remained seated, eyes forward, expression unreadable. And beside him, Deborah, arms folded tightly, lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. They didn't move, but I did. Slowly I rose. My dress uniform caught the light, the ribbons and bars in perfect alignment. It was the first time I'd worn the full set in public. Until now, I'd kept it folded in a garment bag, hidden in the back of my closet, like a relic of someone I used to be. But tonight, I wore every piece, every inch of earned weight. The aisle cleared ahead of me as I walked toward the stage. Phones rose in silence. Flashes popped. The cameras were live, beaming my face into Holmes's office's outposts around the world. No one tried to stop me this time. Hargrave met me at the edge of the stage and extended his hand. I took it. Behind him, the screen now bore my name, centered bold and unqualified, Brigadier General Grace Halberg, Command Strategist Operation Hawthorne. For one breathless moment, the room was utterly still. Then someone clapped, then another, then the room erupted. It wasn't performative. It wasn't polite. It was recognition. A young woman in uniform, maybe 24 at most, stood near the side rows. She had tears on her cheeks, hands clasped at her chest. When she caught my eye, she whispered something I still heard through the chaos. "She's the reason I stayed." My throat tightened. I turned toward the microphone, but didn't speak. I let the weight of the moment settle. I looked past the stage through the camera lenses toward the people. I couldn't see the girls in ROTC classes, the women in field units, the soldiers who had been sidelined, silenced, rewritten. This was for them. Then came the question. A reporter, emboldened by the drama, called from the front row, "General Halberg, do you have any words for your family?" I met his gaze, held it steady. "No," I said simply. "This isn't their moment." She sat across from me, wrapped in pearls, in shame. The suite smelled like old roses, in something faintly antiseptic, expensive but sterile, like it had been staged for a guest who would never unpack. My mother had chosen the hotel closest to the academy. Of course, she always preferred to remain close enough to watch, but far enough to pretend she wasn't involved. She sat stiffly on the velvet settee, hands folded in her lap, nails manicured to perfection. The pearls at her neck, her favorites, the ones she wore to every major family event, seemed to glisten with nervous tension. Not once did she meet my eyes. I placed the manila folder gently on the glass coffee table between us. I didn't open it. She already knew what was inside. Her eyes flickered to it. Then to me, "Grace, I thought perhaps we could talk. Just the two of us. No cameras, no generals, no statements." I gave her nothing, just silence. She tried again. "We're still family, despite everything." "You said that once before," I said finally. "The day you asked me to withdraw from the senior officer command track because Lucas needed it more, because our name couldn't handle both of us succeeding." "That's not what I meant," she whispered. I opened the folder. Inside the original nomination letter for my promotion, the one she intercepted, her handwriting on the margin, "Let's delay until Lucas establishes himself." Then next to it, a draft email, unsent, dated 2 years ago. "Grace, I know you're upset. I was trying to protect you. This spotlight can be cruel. I didn't want you dragged through it, especially not in competition with your brother." I slid the pages across to her. She didn't touch them, only stared. "I found this in the printer queue of your home desktop," I said quietly. "You never sent it, but you wrote it." Her chin trembled. "I was afraid," she said, "of what it would do to our family. Of what your father would say." "You mean what he would say about you," I corrected. "You were afraid of being the mother who let her daughter outshine her son." She pressed her hands to her face, the pearls shifting with every breath. "I didn't know how to help you. You were always so capable, and Lucas needed more. He always needed more. You didn't help either of us," I said. "You let him believe he was more than he was, and you let me believe I had to earn even basic acknowledgement." Her tears came freely now, the kind of crying that had once controlled rooms, the kind that used to unhinge my sense of right and wrong. "But it didn't work anymore." "Mechi mun an kon ho ho hai," she said in Vietnamese, falling back into our old language, as if it might soften the edges. "Me kon biết cách nào cách." I looked at her evenly. "You wanted me silent, and you succeeded. Until now." She finally looked up, her face painted for sympathy, mastered through years of country club diplomacy, was cracked and trembling. "I lost both my children tonight," she whispered. I rose, took the folder, and walked to the door. "No," I said, hand on the handle. "You lost the one who never belonged to you. Blood gave me a name, but choice gave me purpose." The auditorium smelled faintly of lemon oil and something older dust, maybe. History. The walls were lined with framed citations and portraits of officers long retired. Their expressions caught mid-decade, mid-command, mid-pride. I stood behind the podium, not as a guest, not as a forgotten daughter, not even as a soldier trying to reclaim her space, but as someone creating something that had never existed before. The reporters had arrived early. Word of my reinstatement, the televised ceremony, and the strategic credits had spread like brush fire And now they wanted follow-ups, stories, statements, something they could quote with just enough controversy to justify a headline. But today wasn't about them. It was about the dozen cadets seated in the front row, 4 of them women, 2 of them with ribbons, still fresh from Basic 1, still wearing a wrist brace from a field injury. They watched me not like I was famous, but like I might be proof. Margaret sat beside the stage in her favorite navy coat, fingers clasped around a folder embossed in gold. I leaned into the mic. Today, we're announcing the launch of the Margaret Initiative for Women in Defense. The room shifted, pens scratched, cameras clicked. This fund, I continued, will provide strategic training grants, mentorship access, and deployment stipends for women pursuing leadership roles in military intelligence and combat command. It's named for the woman who taught me that service doesn't begin on a battlefield. It begins in silence when you choose to speak for someone else first. Margaret's eyes shimmered, but she didn't smile. She simply nodded, proud and private. Afterward, the reporters took their turns. What motivated you to start this now? What do you say to those who question the accuracy of the documents? Are you still on active command? Then came the one I'd anticipated. Do you still consider yourself a Halberg? The question didn't surprise me. It was always going to come down to blood. I paused, letting the silence build. I don't need to renounce the name, I said evenly. I just need to define it on my own terms. The Halberg name was once used to silence me. Now it introduces me. That quote would appear in 6 publications within hours. By the end of the day, the video of my speech had over 3 million views. I received messages from former cadets, senior officers, even young civilians from military families. Most said the same thing. You said what I couldn't. That night, back in my office at the academy, I opened the window and let the night air in. The sound of marching cadence drifted faintly from the quad below. Margaret had left her folder behind, but I didn't move it. It was part of the room now, like the photo of me shaking Hargrave's hand or the framed page from my first field journal. I turned on the small desk lamp and reached for the manuscript beside my chair. My memoir, still unfinished, but no longer untold. On the cover was the title I'd finally settled on, Command Without Permission. I was just reviewing the last paragraph when I heard the door open behind me. Footsteps. Hesitant. I turned. Lucas stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Tie askew." "I read your book," he said quietly. She wrote the truth in ink, then buried it between pages she hoped I'd never find. The morning light slanted through the lace curtains of Margaret's reading room, soft and golden, the way it always felt in old houses, with wooden floors and memory-thick air. I'd woken early, restless, and found Margaret already in the corner chair, flipping through the thick Halberg family ledger she'd taken from storage the night before. "You might want to see this," she said without looking up. Her fingers were resting on a folded envelope yellowing slightly around the edges, tucked between the pages labeled Legacy. Lineage. My name was handwritten on the front, nothing else. I took it slowly. The paper felt fragile. The seal had never been closed. No stamp, no date. But the handwriting was unmistakably my mother's precise angular, slightly leaning right, as if always preparing to justify itself. I sat by the window and began to read. "Grace, if you're reading this, then I've either grown brave or someone else has done it for me. I don't know what you think of me anymore. Maybe nothing, maybe worse than nothing. But there are things I need to say, even if they're too late. I knew you were different from the beginning, not just bright, brilliant. You watched the world like it was a puzzle, always half solved. And that terrified me. You see, I was raised to believe that men lead and women preserve, that we follow, we smooth edges, we fill in gaps. You never accepted that role. You wanted a map of your own, and I didn't know how to mother that. So I tried to mold you, and when that didn't work, I tried to erase the parts I didn't understand. I told myself I was protecting you from disappointment, from loneliness, from what the world does to women who don't stay small. But really, I was protecting myself from your shadow, from the guilt of knowing I wasn't enough to raise you properly. You would surpass me. I knew that early, and so I began to block you quietly. Subtly, the letter of recommendation that never got sent, the call to my friend at West Point I forgot to make, the application that somehow missed the deadline, each one a pebble in your path, each one wrapped in the word love. But it wasn't love, was it? Not really. It was fear, and fear dressed up as motherhood. Still bruises the same. I paused. My hands had started to tremble. Margaret was silent across the room, pretending not to watch. The room held its breath. Lucas was easier. He needed me. He adored me. You didn't. You challenged me. And I hated how much I admired you for it. If I could do it over, I might choose to love you instead of fear you. That was the final line. No signature. I sat there for several minutes, letting the silence fill the spaces. The letter couldn't. There was no justification, no apology, just admission. And that somehow was worse. Margaret moved gently, as if not to startle me. She never mailed it, she said softly. I found it years ago, tucked into the genealogy records. I kept it. I didn't know if I'd ever show it to you. I'm glad you did, I said. What will you do with it? I looked at the envelope again, then stood and walked to the fireplace in the next room. The embers were still warm from the night before. I placed the letter in, unfolded, and struck a match. It curled slowly, the ink shrinking into ash. I didn't need it framed. I didn't need it published. I didn't need anyone else to read it. Just one sentence stayed with me, etched clean into my memory. If I could do it over, I might choose to love you instead of fear you. That's all the closure I need. He came not to apologize, but to justify. I heard the knock before I saw his face. It was hesitant, uneven, 3 taps, a pause. Then one more, as if he wasn't sure if he'd changed his mind mid-motion. I opened the door slowly, unsure what version of him I'd find on the other side. Lucas stood there in an old hoodie, khaki pants wrinkled at the knees. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. His usual air of effortless charm had slipped off like a coat he didn't know how to wear anymore. Hi, he said. I stepped aside. Come in. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. Margaret had sent another stack of archival letters for the memoir I was finishing. I gestured toward the couch. He sat back, rigid hands clasped, as if waiting for something to arrest him. I didn't speak. I waited. I've been thinking. He began staring at the floor. About what happened. About everything. Silence. I used to think it was harmless, he said, borrowing a little credit, letting them assume. Dad always said, it's all part of the machine right appearances. And what did you think when you signed your name onto that final report? I asked. He winced. At first I told myself it was temporary, that I'd correct it later, that someone would fix it. But then he exhaled. Then the awards came, the invites, the press, and it got harder to imagine stepping aside. I studied him. So you didn't? No. He looked up. Finally, eyes glassy. At some point, I convinced myself that you didn't care, that if you wanted the credit, you would have taken it. I didn't answer. I let that hang there, the quiet filled with 1,000 choices I had made to stay silent for family, for peace, for fear. I watched your speech, he said, the one about the scholarship, the way you said you weren't giving up the name, that you were redefining it. I meant it, I said. He nodded. I know. I came because I needed to say it, even if it doesn't matter now. I was afraid, not of you, of what you would become if people actually saw you, because I knew the moment they did, I'd disappear. His voice cracked on the last word. I let the stillness settle between us. And did you, I asked, disappear? He looked at me, truly looked. Yes, and I deserved it. A beat. Grace, he whispered. Can you forgive me? I leaned back slightly, keeping my voice calm. That's not something I owe you, I said. But I hope one day you'll earn it from yourself. Some medals glint under spotlights. This one shined in silence. The desert wind had its own kind of hush, like it knew the weight of secrets. The base was buried 2 hours past the last highway, camouflaged by heat and distance. No signs, no press, no flags waving in ceremonial rhythm, just concrete steel and discipline. I'd been here before years ago, when I was just a name on a rotation list. Back then, I wasn't supposed to command. Just observe, just assist, just stay invisible. Today was different. Lieutenant Colonel Rowe met me at the gate with a clipboard and a half smile. Still hate palms, she asked. Still allergic, I said. She handed me a black lanyard. No insignia, just clearance. They're ready. The ceremony room was smaller than most storage facilities on public bases. 20 chairs in 2 tight rows. No banner, no brass band, no high-ranking general reading boilerplate praises. Just the people who mattered. People who knew. I recognized a few faces. People who'd operated under my briefings, followed maps I'd sketched on the back of ration boxes, trusted my voice in their ears when visibility dropped to zero. Roe took the podium with the ease of someone who didn't need to impress. "We don't record these citations," she began, "but we remember them. This one's overdue." There was no scroll, no gold foil certificate, only a small black velvet box. She opened it with reverence and turned to me. "For distinguished leadership in operations, classified under Black File Authority, with exceptional conduct in multinational joint environments, we award Brigadier General Grace Hallberg the DLD designation." The room stood, not in applause, but in silence, a kind of silence that meant "we see you." I stepped forward. My hands didn't shake. When she pinned the medal onto my chest, bare of ribbon, starched but unembellished, I felt no rush of adrenaline, just alignment, like something in the world had finally stopped spinning off axis. After the briefest nod, I walked to the side of the room. One of the junior officers, a woman barely 22, leaned over as I passed. "They say you turned down a senior appointment," once she whispered, eyes wide, "to stay in the field with us." I didn't respond, just smiled. It was true, not because I feared the top, because I never wanted to lead from a balcony. I wanted to be where things happened, where real weight lived. Later, in the dormitory turned guest quarters, I unpacked slowly. Margaret's handwriting peeked from a cream envelope tucked into my travel bag. She must have slipped it in before I left. I sat by the window, the base lights barely glinting on the sand outside, and unfolded the letter. "You don't need cameras to be remembered. They tried to erase the girl who didn't bow, who didn't break, who didn't ask permission. But the world remembers truth louder than ceremony. The girl they tried to erase became the woman history will remember. Ink lasts longer than inheritance." The final sentence came easier than I expected. I didn't even realize my hand had stopped trembling until I set the pen down and looked back at the filled pages, all 243 of them. The invisible general, written in the margins of war, between deployments, in bunks, in briefings, in coffee shops, that never asked why I sat alone. I had written most of it in longhand, an old habit I refused to break. Type came later, but ink was personal. Ink carried weight. Margaret was the first to read it. She finished in 2 days. When she handed the pages back to me, her eyes were moist but steady. "You didn't write to hurt them," she said. "You wrote to free yourself. The publisher didn't ask for edits. They only asked when I could speak on it." I said no at first. I wasn't interested in a book tour. I didn't want to stage. But then came the invitation from the academy, not the main hall, just a workshop, closed doors. 10 cadets, all women, all first-generation military. The session was called Leading Without Permission. I stood before them in a small classroom with mismatched chairs and flickering fluorescent lights. Not exactly history-making, but something about the quiet in the room felt monumental. We didn't start with rank or rules. I started with a question. What's the first thing they told you couldn't do? A dozen hands raised. Speak up. Take command. Apply for special ops. Disagree. I nodded. You're here now. That suggests you weren't really paying attention from the start. A chuckle, tinged with uncertainty. In the midst of the gathering, a young woman with dark braids and a determined gaze lifted her hand. "How should I handle it when I feel like no one has faith in me?" she inquired. For a fleeting instant, I caught a glimpse of my younger self, more intense, more reserved, alone once more, feeling the weight of being overlooked. Time and time again, one does not linger for faith. I spoke with deliberate slowness. "You act as though it has already arrived." That was the instant when the atmosphere in the room transformed completely. We continued to explore strategies and moral considerations, finding ways to give commands without echoing the voices of those who had bellowed theirs. They posed inquiries that I had previously feared to articulate, inquiries regarding honesty and moral principles. The weight of solitude lingers on. By the end of the 2-hour session, their energy had shifted, not filled with eagerness, but rather grounded and steady. They were perfectly capable of finding their own way. They simply required a person who had endured. As the last of the cadets filed out, one remained behind, lost in thought. She was petite, her anxious energy concealed beneath an almost flawless stance. She passed me a crumpled piece of notebook paper and turned away before I had the chance to express my gratitude. Within it, in a flowing, slanted script, the words read, "You transformed my perception of who I am." This time, my name was the first to be called. I stepped onto the stage, not merely as an observer, nor as a hesitant addition to another's narrative, but as the one poised to share my own story. The spring sun streamed through the glass dome of Arlington Hall, creating shimmering lines of gold on the polished floor. Lines of cadets stood poised and ready. Uniforms, pristine composure held in check beneath the weight of tradition and honor. Their families gathered in the audience, a hush of eager anticipation enveloping the room. I had once found myself among that crowd. At this moment, I found myself facing it. Today, I received the news that I have achieved my rank, yet the reality is that many of you have taken the lead without needing a title, without seeking approval, and without waiting for recognition. I allowed the quiet to envelop us, the sort that imbues the upcoming words with significance. Belonging doesn't require a label. There's no need for an introduction to leave a lasting impression, and you don't have to seek validation to know you're on the right path. My gaze swept across the room, pausing momentarily at the distant corner on the right. In the dim light, just beyond the final row, Lucas lingered in the shadows. No uniform, no ceremony, only him standing there, observing, applauding, engaged. It seemed unlikely that this was meant for me, given what I had decided to embody. I refrained from smiling. I chose not to wave. I just let it go and continued with my life. The first name on this graduating list was Lieutenant Evelyn Sharp, a fierce cadet with fiery determination, who once asked me, "What should I do when they tell me I don't belong here?" She was finally a part of something greater. I whispered her name softly. She moved ahead with determination. I placed her insignia not over her heart, as was customary, but directly at her collarbone, ensuring it would be visible and impossible to overlook. Just as I had once been denied that very honor, Margaret sat in the front row, a small American flag neatly folded on her lap, her expression a blend of warmth and serenity. Words had become unnecessary for us. The story resonated deeply. Additional names emerged. More shoulders set firmly. Additional voices resonated with the oath. Once the last cadet took their place in formation, I moved back to the microphone. Let them claim. I shattered convention. I declared I was never taught to protect those who sought to erase my existence. She had once been removed from a program. Now she reshapes the guidelines that others adhere to. What started as a hush, rooted in trepidation, transformed into a name uttered with deep respect. When faced with injustice, the power of quiet defiance and unwavering truth ensures that no falsehood can endure in the light for long. Some legacies are passed down, yet those shaped by struggle and conviction endure far beyond. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. And feel free to comment below with a 1 if you felt understood, especially if you're still seeking your own justice.